Most people believe that dementia begins when memory starts to fail. When someone forgets a name, misplaces objects, or repeats the same story. As long as that does not happen, everything is assumed to be fine. But in neurology, we know something very different. By the time memory loss becomes obvious, the brain has already been sending subtle warning signs for years, sometimes more than a decade. These signals are often ignored because they are not directly related to forgetting. Today you are going to understand 5 of those early signs. Not to create fear, but to bring clarity. Because recognizing them early can completely change the way your brain ages. Stay until the end, because the last sign is the most ignored in daily life, and also one of the most clinically revealing. And I want you to understand something from the beginning. This is not meant to alarm you. If I had to explain this to a close family member, I would say it exactly like this, calmly, respectfully, and with useful information. The important question is not whether you have dementia or not. The truly useful question is how to distinguish normal aging from the first real changes in the brain. In neurology, this difference is known as the window of opportunity. It is the period in which the brain still retains enough adaptability to respond to changes in lifestyle, prevention, and daily habits. But this window does not last forever. The problem is that during this time, the signs are not obvious. They are not dramatic. They are so subtle that they are easily confused with stress, fatigue, or simply aging. And that is exactly why today we are going to change the way you interpret them. The first sign is not directly related to memory, and yet it is one of the most important. It involves something we use every single day without thinking: smell. You may have noticed that coffee does not smell the same, that food seems less intense, or that other people detect odors that you barely notice. Many people attribute this to age, allergies, or respiratory issues. And it is true that smell can naturally decline over time. But there is a key difference. The olfactory system is directly connected to the brain without intermediate filtering. That is why, when certain neurological pathways begin to change, smell can be one of the earliest areas to reflect it. This does not mean that losing smell equals dementia. That would be incorrect. But when the loss is progressive, noticeable, and without a clear cause, it has been observed as a factor associated with a higher risk of future cognitive decline. In clinical practice, this appears more often than most people think. A 68-year-old patient came in for something that seemed simple. Food had started tasting different over time. It was not taste itself, but smell, which had declined without her fully realizing it. That finding allowed for early action, lifestyle adjustments, and preventive follow-up. What mattered most was not the diagnosis, but what she said afterward. No one had ever explained that something so small could be important. And that is the reality of the brain. Early signs almost always seem insignificant until they are not. The second sign appears during sleep. Some people begin to move intensely while sleeping. They talk, shout, become agitated, or act out vivid scenes as if they were real. Often a partner notices it, while in other cases it goes unnoticed for years. This is not simply dreaming a lot. It is a specific condition called REM sleep behavior disorder. During REM sleep, the brain normally paralyzes the body so we do not physically act out our dreams. It is a protective mechanism. But when this system fails partially, the body begins to act out what the mind is dreaming. This phenomenon has been studied and has been associated as an early marker of certain neurodegenerative diseases, including Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia. It is not a direct or immediate cause-effect relationship, but it is a clinically documented risk indicator. The problem is that it is often normalized. It is attributed to stress, anxiety, or poor sleep quality, and it is not investigated until other clearer symptoms appear. That is why this sign matters, because it is rarely detected early without external observation. The third sign does not affect memory, but something more subtle: motivation. In the brain, there is a key region called the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, motivation, and initiating actions. When this area begins to function less efficiently, the change is not forgetfulness. It is a loss of internal drive to start things. The person is not necessarily sad. They simply stop initiating activities with the same natural energy as before. Long-term studies have observed that early apathy may be associated with a higher risk of later cognitive decline. In clinical practice, this is very clear. A 72-year-old man, previously active and consistent, began gradually abandoning his routines. He was no longer initiating activities, not due to conscious disinterest, but due to lack of internal drive. His family described it with a precise phrase: "He is not sad, he has simply shut down." At first, this is interpreted as retirement or normal aging. But in some cases, the origin is not emotional, but neurological. The problem with this sign is that it does not create urgency. It is not uncomfortable enough to prompt help seeking, and therefore it progresses silently. The fourth sign is especially confusing because it affects behavior. People who were always stable begin to show changes in conduct: reduced social filter, impulsivity, inappropriate comments, or unexplained irritability. Families often feel that the person is no longer the same. It is important to clarify that not all behavioral changes in older age are disease-related. Stress, grief, or loneliness can also influence behavior. But when the change is persistent, marked, and clearly different from the previous personality, it may have a neurological basis. The orbitofrontal cortex is the region responsible for social self-control, acting as a filter between thought and action. When this filter is disrupted, disinhibited, or socially inappropriate behavior can appear, which is characteristic of certain forms of frontotemporal dementia. A typical case is a 74-year-old man who went from being reserved to showing impulsive behavior and inappropriate comments in family settings. Initially, this was interpreted as a personality change. But neurological evaluation revealed another reality. It was not a decision, it was brain dysfunction. These cases are often mistaken for psychiatric problems, which delays diagnosis for years. The fifth sign is likely the most visible, yet the most misinterpreted: walking pattern. With age, it is normal for gait to change. However, when the origin is neurological, the pattern is different. Walking requires complex coordination between balance, planning, motor memory, and environmental control. That is why, when the brain loses efficiency, gait is one of the first systems to show it. It has been observed that walking speed can predict cognitive decline even in early stages, sometimes better than certain memory tests. Because the problem is not in the legs, but in brain coordination. A key sign appears when walking and speaking at the same time becomes difficult. The brain begins to prioritize tasks, as if it cannot perform both smoothly. Another pattern is the so-called magnetic gait, with short, slow steps and difficulty initiating movement. In one clinical case, a 71-year-old woman arrived with repeated falls without an orthopedic cause. Her gait showed short, slow steps from the beginning. Evaluation did not reveal muscle problems, but rather executive function alterations in the brain. This is crucial. Many falls in older adults are not purely physical. They can be neurological. And if the brain is not evaluated, an important opportunity for intervention is lost. Now you have the 5 signs: smell, sleep, motivation, behavior, and gait. None of them is memory. And all of them can appear years before dementia becomes obvious. But more important than identifying them is understanding the context. Medicine today has changed. It is no longer only about late diagnosis, but early intervention. Habits such as exercise, proper sleep, blood pressure and glucose control, cognitive stimulation, active social life, and stress management have a real impact on brain health. They are not miracle cures, but they are evidence-based modifiable factors. And they work best within that window of opportunity where the brain can still adapt. What matters now is not panic or self-diagnosis. These are not diagnoses, they are warning signs. The correct approach is to observe, understand, and if something consistently fits, consult a professional calmly. And what you can start doing today is actively taking care of your brain. Move more, sleep better, learn new things, maintain social connections, and protect your overall health. Because in the end, it is not about living in fear, but living with information. Dementia is not always an inevitable destiny. There are signs. There is prevention. And there is time to act. If this content helped you better understand brain health, share it with someone close. not to create worry, but to provide clarity. And if you want to keep learning about brain health and healthy aging, we continue sharing clear and practical daily content here. Taking care of the mind is not only medical prevention. It is also a form of respect for your own life, memory, and time.